Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the ICC International Trade and Prosperity Week. I'm Chris Southworth, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. We're now looking at the next session on net zero at scale. How do we leverage the power of SMEs? The sessions up to now have been very much focused on the role of SMEs across a whole wide range of agendas. But in the context of this conversation, there were a few pertinent points made this morning around SMEs being the largest carbon footprint, the challenges of scope 3, how do we get net zero commitments and delivery down through supply chains, especially across global jurisdictions, but also that SMEs are drivers of innovation. Much of the innovation going on out there is actually in that SME community. So how do we mobilize that to good effect? And then some broader points made around the need to increase ambitions. There was a figure quoted this morning around all the government commitments put together only take us 20% towards the overall goal on finance, particularly to take us to the net zero final ambition. So there's an awful long way to go and a big role for the private sector to play in that. And then lastly, a need to really focus on the emerging markets. Those are the economies that are fastest growing, and many of those will become bigger carbon emitters in the future. But there's a great opportunity to build into those economies all the sort of infrastructure that we need to deliver net zero. So challenges and opportunities that have been coming up through the conversation. But the big question is, how do we get net zero at scale, and how do we mobilize that SME community? And for that session, for that conversation, this session is perfectly positioned and placed. So I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker for the session. That's Gonzalo Muñoz. He was the high-level climate champion for COP25. We couldn't be in a safer pair of hands, I think. COP25 did a terrific job of not only delivering COP25, but doing that and transitioning countries from Chile to Spain and still delivering it very well. So hats off to everybody who was involved last year. But Gonzalo, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, and good afternoon, good day for whatever you're connecting. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. And I, of course, thank the ICC for these invitations to be part of the International Trade and Prosperity Week and help definitely highlight how companies, organizations, and governments are implementing the real solutions that will deliver a more inclusive, sustainable, and greener outcomes to really build back better. I think that we are absolutely clear that science has spoken strong. We need to have our emissions by 2030 in order to deliver a net zero carbon world in time. I repeat, have our emissions by 2030. Even that's absolutely critical to get in time to the 2050 trajectory. So time is running out, and the risks associated with climate change, we all know, are absolutely existential. And urgency has become even more evident with the Code Red report that was published by the IPCC last August. So to have the possibility of a stable planet for future generation, we must act now. Probably we should have started acting a long time before, but we need to understand that we need to act now, and this is a task that must involve everyone. The good news is that the transition to sustainability is definitely accelerating. We are definitely seeing a growing number of net zero commitments by non-state and subnational actors that are responsible for all sectors of the economy and all scales of governance. The Race to Zero campaign has become the standard for what it means to make a credible commitment, and to meet this goal, every business, and I say every business, no matter the size or industry or region, has a definitely role to play. We all know that SMEs make up to 90% of businesses worldwide. And as an entrepreneur myself, I can tell you they are the backbone of our communities and our economies, and they cannot be left behind in this race to zero. Every actor, governments, NGOs, and multinationals needs to step up to help to achieve their climate goals. And in that sense, in every value chain, you will see SMEs integrated. So together with my dear good friend and we say, brother in crime, not brother in crime, Nigel Topping, the high-level champion for COP26. Our role as high-level champions is to accelerate action of all non-state actors around the world committed to keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And we deliver action mainly through our global campaigns, both supported by the United Nations. The first one, Race to Zero, which is bringing together the leadership and the support of companies, cities, regions, and investors for a healthy, resilient recovery and no carbon emissions that prevent future threats, create decent jobs, and definitely encourage sustainable growth. All members, being part of Race to Zero, are committed to the same general objective, to reduce the half of their emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050 at the very latest in all areas, quickly and fairly, online with the Paris Agreement and with transparent action plans with solid short-term goals. We have then a sister campaign called Race to Resilience that is catalyzing a radical change in the global ambition of climate resilience, putting people and nature in first place in the search for a resilient world where on the ground we survive the crisis and climate tensions, but that we prosper despite of the climate crisis. With these two campaigns, our objective is to boost the system's transformation rate before COP26 in Glasgow in a few weeks. This will send government officials a strong signal that companies, cities, regions, and investors are all united to fulfill the Paris objectives and create a more inclusive and resilient decarbonized economy. Race to Zero, that we launched with Nigel in June 2020, now has more than 6,300 members from 110 countries, including almost 4,500 companies, 800 cities, 35 regions, 731 universities, and more than 250 financial institutions that now represent more than $90 trillion in net zero commitments. All of these numbers will be updated today, so you will see how much all of this is growing every day. Because despite of the pandemic, last year, Race to Zero experienced a spectacular growth by 190% in all types of actors. The campaign collaborates with a group of initiatives and networks which have independently been mobilized, mobilizing non-party net zero commitments and who all meet the Race to Zero minimum criteria. It's very well backed by science. And in that side, in all of that structure, we have the SME Climate Hub as one of those brilliant partnership, providing small and medium-sized enterprises with the tools and resources they need to make a climate commitment and take immediate action. This is where small and medium-sized businesses take climate action and gain a competitive edge. Join the SME Climate Hub that we have launched with the ICC last year. So, in recognizing that climate change poses a threat to the economy, nature, and society at large, companies definitely, as being part of Race to Zero, they commit to take action immediately in order to have greenhouse emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions before 2050, and of course disclose progress on a yearly basis. In doing so, they join government, business, cities, regions, and universities around the world that share the same vision and can then be activating the ambition loop at a global level, at a multilateral level. So being part of this network is offering far
I think we've just lost Gonzalo's camera, so just wait for a second or two.
collaborative and leaders. You hear me?
Yeah, you just lost me for the last minute or so, or 30 seconds or so.
Okay, so within the initiative, within the SME Climate Hub, there are also forward-thinking supply chain leaders who understand the need to work with their suppliers in order to reach collective targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through firm action and collaboration, while looking to inspire others to do the same. They are gathered under the 1.5 supply chain leaders at the SME Climate Hub that was initiated by the Exponential Roadmap initiative, together with founding partners like Ericsson, IKEA, Telia, BT Group, Unilever, Telefonica, just naming a few of them. So we're seeing now how big companies around the world are being part of this trajectory and using the SME Climate Hub and the supply chain system to integrate SMEs in their scope 3. So it's not about what let's call one Unilever says for themselves. It's about what Unilever is calling for all the supply chain. So believe me, in this right moment, they're asking for the SMEs to also have this commitment. Every small business making the SME climate commitment is recognized in the global race to zero, joining a community of like-minded non-state actors pushing for change. Over now, 2,200 SMEs are now part of this movement through the SME Climate Hub. And last week, we celebrated the SME Climate Hub Spanish translation launch in collaboration with the local government. So there's even no reason or why not to join. Also, as a co-founder of the first B Corp in South America and co-founder of the B Corp movement in Latin America, I am thrilled to announce that we have now over 1,600 companies that have joined, and most of them are SMEs that committed to net zero 2030 through the B Corp Climate Collective mechanism. So all economic system we know must change if we are to avoid the most catastrophic impact of global warming. We know that, and SMEs have a critical role to play in the process. We need all companies and actors around the world to commit, and we need definitely business leadership to accelerate the trajectory of emission reduction inside their individual business and to advocate for climate policy with their governments. The invitation is absolutely clear. Join the SME Climate Hub today and be counted in the Net Zero Golden Standard global campaign called Race to Zero. And remember, if you're not part of the solution, you will become part of the problem. Thank you very much. Look forward to see you in Glasgow. Back to you, Chris.
Well, look, thanks very much, Gonzalo. A really powerful call to action there. I think it's hard to argue with that. I'm going to hand over to our next speaker now, Justin Perrettson. Justin is the head of sustainability partnerships at Novozymes, but he's also the global chair for the ICC Commission on Energy and Environment, which is the overall body within ICC which looks at sustainability and climate action. Justin, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. There's a slight connection issue. Just bear with me 1 second. There we go. Firstly, thank you to our dear friends at ICC UK for putting everything together this week. It's always a pleasure to be able to work with you guys. And also a huge thank you to our dear friend Gonzalo. For those of you who know Gonzalo, his passion and energy and commitment to this cause is unparalleled, and he's been an absolute pleasure to work with, and he has been an absolute SME champion from the get-go. My job this afternoon is basically to help moderate a panel of outstanding experts and practitioners from around the world. I'm going to keep my opening remarks very short because I think there's not much to add to what Gonzalo has said, other than to maybe call out the fact that COP26 in Glasgow is less than 2 weeks away. And we need to get it right. And the only way that we can actually really make the difference at COP is not just to think big in terms of nationally determined contributions, it's to act small and make sure that value supply chains around the world and the SME community as a whole is part of this climate journey that we are on. So I'm delighted today to be able to share the floor with friends and colleagues from around the world. Firstly, Wouter Staal, who is the CEO and co-founder of Yoghurt in the Netherlands. Victor Dosoretz, who is the CEO of Mantra Group in Argentina and is the ICC Small Business Champion. Also joining us today is Sarat Sengupta from HSBC Banking. We have my old friend Gabrielle, who is Telecom, now called BT, and we're going to wrap up with Sam Lux from Her Majesty's Government, who is helping drive public engagement around these key issues. So without further ado, we have around an hour or so. What I would like to do first and foremost is turn to Wouter. Wouter, you really have hardwired climate change and climate action into your business from the very, very beginning. Could you maybe just put a few words to climate action from your perspective and what that means to you as an SME? You know, could you share with us some of the challenges that you've faced and how you've gone about addressing them? And specifically and particularly, how does that really work in terms of value and supply chains? How do larger corporates help you in this net zero process?
Lots of questions, but very delightful to help you with that. Indeed, I'm the founder and CEO of Yoghurt Barn. We are a Dutch company with 13 restaurants throughout the Netherlands, soon expanding to Belgium, and we are also supplying to retail to more countries at the moment. 2 years ago, we thought we are doing that many sustainable things within our operations, but we need to get an umbrella theme, and CO2 emissions were unclear to many of us. And so when we read about that and learned about it, we were very enthused to see the opportunities that everything basically came together. And we're the owners, and we feel proud, and we want to do everything right, intrinsically motivated to make a positive impact. And that's when we thought, why go climate neutral? Why don't we go climate positive or carbon negative? So that's what we implemented. And it means that we measure everything we do, scope 1, 2, and 3. We reduce as much as possible and have a roadmap for that, and overcompensate everything that cannot be reduced. So that is how we proceed, which is basically the same. The process is the same as climate neutral. We've been able to eliminate scope 1 and 2 completely by the start of this year. And in terms of scope 3 and value chain, supply chain, we are a restaurant chain, and we bring yogurt, but also plant-based dairy to market. And everything we do, which is new, is 100% plant-based. And we have set ourselves objectives that by 2023, everything in our operation has to be plant-based. But then you need other parties, because not everything is as delicious as the normal. So we, as an example, all our pastries were with organic dairy and butter. But we wanted to change that to plant-based, but it needed to be as delicious or even better. But we cannot do it ourselves. We don't have bakeries. So we went to Upfield. They have the products, the knowledge on how to process that. We had a local caterer company, and as a three together combined, we have now been able to make everything plant-based. Nobody knows it, because you come to a restaurant to enjoy yourself, and with the plus that it's plant-based. So we are able to fulfill the philosophy of feel-good food with a positive impact, and create some kind of awareness towards the consumer and the guest and the fan that, hey, it feels even better because we're doing not only good for ourselves, but also for the others, for other people, for the planet, etc. And yeah, I can go a long way on all the reduction measures that we've done, but this is a very clear example where larger corporations play a role. Oh, you're on mute still.
Sorry, well, so just before I turn to Victor, you're kind of, if I can sum this up, you're looking at this more from an opportunity than maybe a climate risk perspective. What kind of feedback have you had from your consumers and your customer base as you've driven this process forward?
Yeah, it comes intrinsically, because we as owners, we want to do good. But then from all stakeholders, the guest as such, or the consumer, is sharing love, but not as much as we want. It's a process, because we don't want to point fingers like, hey, you have to go plant-based instead of or regular dairy. No, it's about, hey, how can you twist it positively? We want to create a positive impact instead of pointing towards the negative, but it really does take time. All the other stakeholders are embracing us with open arms. It's ridiculous. It's such a big opportunity by just doing good and doing the right thing, and consumers will follow, but it takes more time.
Great, excellent, thank you. Victor, you are also an SME CEO and founder, and you're also part of the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce SME Climate Change Program. Wouter's just touched on some of these issues around scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and the need for this to be a process and a journey. So could you just share with us some of your experiences, particularly in terms of how you're going about fixing targets and aligning that process? And then, of course, you're in a very different part of the world. You're in Argentina. So are there any differences from your perspective, particularly from sort of an emerging or growing market sort of aspect around some of these net zero conversations?
Okay, thank you, Justin. I'll give me 1 minute to make my introduction. I want to thank you for your introduction, especially to Chris for his fantastic job doing at ICC UK. I'm very happy of the growth of Chris' work. Action on net zero, it's a must, as Gonzalo pointed, and we must move quickly. Let me also point it that we are part of SME Climate Hub since the beginning, because we understand it's important. I'm going to talk now in my hat of CEO of Mantra. We are located in Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, and also very soon we will planning to open in other Latin American countries. We know that in the past SME have been underserved by climate action initiative. So I will explain what we are doing related to your question. The question is what to do and how to do, and this is how we start to work and planify our activities. Our understanding is that by all means we cannot think on profitable business if they are not so sustainable. And of course, we have to improve on productivity. And as Chris mentioned, the government support and collaboration is essential these days. And so when we start to think what can we do, we need to fix target and know where carbon emissions are in our business. We are a trading company, so in order to find our ways and solutions, we need to understand where are our emissions. Then we understand that we must be aligned, and of course, a very important thing is the implementation. And we think that also that organizations like ICC can cooperate and guide us as SMEs. Well, in Mantra, talking about scope, the different scope, most of our products are purchased and made in China, and also we produce locally some products. So related to your question, what are we doing? We redesigned our products in terms of the electronic parts. Most of our products are being charged by USB, so we don't use AC energy. The type of battery, that batteries are also a headache, are long life for the use. We also promote the charging of the devices in not big demands hours. So this also helps for the environment. We work and communicate the importance of the conscience of the users. Since some time ago, we started to use what we call smart manuals. We stopped to print paper users manuals because it is not necessary, and with digital solution can be approached. For the delivery, mainly for e-commerce, that grows a lot, mainly since COVID-19. We started to use biodegradable bags instead of traditional bags. we also work on the reduction of the gift boxes and the size of our products. For the use of our devices, we promote reusable pads, and also we work on the delivery on the last mile by electric or bicycle delivery. And well, I think this is what I can explain you. Sorry for being so long.
No, Victor, not long at all. The one thing is we can't see you, my friend. Your camera seems to be turned off. So if you can have a look at that, that would be great. I think what you have done is beautifully outlined, just building on what Wouter has been saying, not just sort of building in the business model, but actually starting to redesign the products that you're actually selling to really integrate sustainability and climate considerations into what you're doing. What I'm going to do now is just switch gears slightly, because I think we've touched on sort of the SME perspective. One of the key things, of course, along this journey is finance, because if we don't get finance into the right business at the right time and in the right way, we cannot really drive the change that we want. We're very fortunate today to be joined by our dear friends from HSBC, who really have been at the vanguard of this process for a very long time. Surat, I'm going to turn over to you in a second. If you could just turn on your camera so we can see you, that would be great.
My camera is turned on. Can you not see me?
Wonderful. There we go. Now we've got you on screen. Excellent. So I just wanted to turn to you because I think this is a key component piece, not just of this discussion, but of course of COP26 itself. What kind of measures do you see being needed to really get this net zero transition, and particularly into the SME space moving forward? Are there any specific roadblocks that are kind of sitting out there that you could maybe focus in on, and how do we go about removing them if they are there?
Sure. Thanks, Justin, and thank you to Chris and ICC UK for organizing this panel. Very, very happy to be here in something that, I mean, there are areas of work which you can find that you have to do, but this is one area of work that one is passionate about. So I'm always happy to speak on this topic. So look, I think that the two things that there is broad consensus that has developed already is that there is a climate emergency, right? It's not a climate problem anymore. It's a climate emergency that we are tackling now. And the second thing is that up to 80% of a corporate's footprint is in its supply chains, and which is a lot of that is made up through SMEs, right? So without helping SMEs transition to net zero, we cannot tackle this emergency. So that is established, but it's very easy to then push the problem downwards into the SME world and say, why don't you solve this problem? Because there is a problem that we need to solve. And we all know that that is not going to happen, and that will be counterproductive. Now, what we have seen, the shift that we are seeing is that actually pre-pandemic, we were seeing a bit of a buyer-driven agenda. So you had the large sort of buyers, the big retailers, etc., and we did a well-publicized transaction, for example, with Walmart, where we put in a financial supply chain to support the transition of their physical supply chain and their carbon footprint. That buyer-driven agenda moved towards a more supplier-led agenda post the pandemic, where a lot of suppliers, because we bank both buyers and suppliers, a lot of suppliers started speaking to us about how can we help them transition. So one of the things that is very clear for us is that this is not just going to happen on its own, and there are three pillars which we believe needs to come together for this to happen. And the first one is business momentum. And what do I mean by business momentum? It means that the large corporates, their suppliers, financiers like us, and the entire sort of ecosystem of the value chain needs to collaborate, because it's not going to happen standalone. Because you cannot, I mean, it's too expensive for SMEs today to just say, oh, I want to transition, but I don't know how, I don't have access to financing, etc. So there has to be a collaboration, the business momentum. This business momentum is there in certain sectors, but not as much in other sectors. And this has to happen across sectors and has to include their supply chain, which again, in some sectors is being overlooked, if I may call it that way. The second is policy momentum, right? So we have now most of the large trading blocs, whether it's China, US, EU, all have their net zero ambitions. I mean, recently the Middle East as well have their net zero ambitions detailed out. But we need to have much more than that. Just saying that we want to reach net zero is not going to allow it to happen. We need to have very detailed plans and policies on how SMEs are going to get enabled to have this transition, which could mean supporting them with different aspects, whether it's knowledge gaps, whether it's standards, etc. But that needs to happen. The third pillar is technology momentum. So what we have done so far cannot take us to our goal. If that had happened, then we wouldn't have been in the mess that we are in today, right? We are in a serious mess or emergency, whatever you call them. That's what I see here. So we need innovation, significant innovation. It is believed that there is enough innovation that exists today to take us to our 2030 plans. But there is more innovation required to take us to the 2050 plans. And that means that we need to work with universities, academics, etc., to get research from those universities out into commercialized ventures. And we need to innovate and adopt new technologies faster, because if we keep doing it the same way, it'll still be very expensive for SMEs to change and transition. So we need these new technologies, new sort of ways of innovation, which can help transition faster and cheaper. So I'll keep it there, and happy to sort of elaborate later as we go along.
Great, thank you so much. We're actually very fortunate today because we actually have a number of people listening in, and some are starting to post questions in the chat. I'm just going to flag one question that's come in from our colleagues at Standard Chartered and from Sharad Sinha, because I think it relates to what you've just been talking about, Surat. Really, as the question says, SME participation isn't optional anymore, it's mandatory. So what would be the milestones that would indicate success of SME integration into this process, particularly globally and very specifically in Asia? Yeah, so I mean, there are two things. I mean, one of the challenges that we have today, Justin, and thanks for that question, Sharad. All the challenges that we have is there is a bit of a data gap, right? So the data gaps have two impacts. One is SMEs don't know what transition is, right? I mean, I think Victor sort of spoke to that a little bit already. So how do you measure that I have reduced my carbon footprint? How much do I need to reduce my carbon footprint by? What are the things that I need to do? That's one data gap. The other data gap is the measurement of the measurement volume sort of coming up to whether it's the government, whether it's financiers, etc. Right? So those are the two challenges that we have. There is a lot of work that's happening, and I think the way to do this is essentially using new technology. I mean, we have new technology like Internet of Things, blockchain, etc. We've got to innovate, and that allows us to create the transparency in the supply chains, go deep into the supply chains, much deeper than we do today, right? Today, most people sort of go tier 1, tier 2, but use that to go deeper, right down to the farmers, if we're required, and measure what is the change in footprint, and hence what is it that we are achieving through our financing of these supply chains for their carbon transition. Right. Surat, thank you. In terms of transitioning, I'm going to turn to our dear friend and colleague Gabrielle from BT. Gabrielle, BT have been at this for a very, very long time now, particularly in terms of trying to understand across scope 1, 2, and 3, trying to really engage with suppliers in particular. Could you maybe just give us a few words as to your journey around this and how, not only have you started, but where do you see things moving forward?
Yeah, and thank you very much, Justin, and thank you for having me here today. So just to set a bit of context, as you mentioned, at BT, we've been on a climate action journey for almost 30 years. We set our first carbon reduction target in 1992. We set our first science-based target in 2008, which is a long time before anyone was really talking about science-based targets. And that target was to reduce the carbon emissions intensity of our business by 80% by 2020. We met that target 4 years ahead of time in 2016, primarily through us purchasing renewable electricity. So coming out of Paris, you know, what would a company need to do to be a climate leader? And I think it was pretty obvious to me, it was to set a science-based target aligned to 1.5 pathway. When we at BT, when we set this target and announced it, there were 3 of us. There were 3 companies in the world that had these targets. And of course now, you know, there are thousands. And I just say target setting has been very important to us at BT because it's galvanized the internal business, it's changed business behavior, but it's also sent market signal, demand signals, for example, on renewable energy, on electric vehicles. And I think that's really important if we're going to see the systematic change that we need. So again, so looking at BT's end-to-end carbon footprint then, so 5% of that footprint is from our own operations, 24% is from customers using our products and services, and 71% is from upstream supply chain. So obviously we knew that if we look at our end-to-end carbon impact, we definitely need to focus on supply chain. We've done that, and we are doing that in a few different ways. One is we are building a sustainability clause into some key contracts. So basically, as part of the contract negotiation, we're saying to suppliers, actually, to win this contract, you need to reduce the carbon emissions of your business over the term. In December, our Chief Procurement Officer wrote out to hundreds of suppliers asking them, do you have a net zero target? Are you purchasing renewables? Are you working with your suppliers in turn? And you know, we collected the data and then actually had follow-up calls with some of the people who said no, to try and understand what the barriers were and could we help. And I think what we've seen just in the past 6 months, again, as Gonzalo mentioned, thousands of more companies coming on board. But it's also really about using our purchasing power. So 15% of our adjudication criteria is linked to sustainability and to human rights. We found that asking companies to report to CDP has been hugely important because they just start thinking about climate action. And innovation has been mentioned. So we run something we called a game-changing challenge, which is a bit like a dragon's den. So suppliers can come in and pitch ideas focused on sustainability and innovation. So when we come to SMEs, yes, we got together with Perrettson, IKEA, Telia, and Unilever because, as you can imagine, so we have tens of thousands of SME suppliers, and we can't speak to all of them. That's just not possible. But we wanted to engage with them on this journey, and that's why in the SME Climate Hub, we're hoping to to help with offering tools and guidance and how to start on this journey. But Chris mentioned at the beginning, there's so much more to do. You know, what to me, the big challenge this year, and will continue to be, is about scale. We need tens of thousands of companies to come on board on this journey. So as everybody's mentioned, yes, go to and have a look at the SME Climate Hub. I think a big buyer like BT, we're increasingly going to look at our suppliers' climate performance.
Great. Gabrielle, as always, thank you. I actually remember being in the room when you stood up and announced that target. It was it was very dark, and you had a light shone on you. And I think kudos to you as an organization for making that room full of light and not darkness, because a lot of companies, including Novozymes, are now on that journey with you. We are getting a lot of questions into the chat, which is fantastic. I will do my very best to get through all of them. We have allowed time to really try and make this as dynamic as possible. Gabrielle, just one quick question that's come in that I think touches on some of the things that you're saying, from Anna Houston at ACM Consult. You've mentioned the climate, the hub and the work that's being done there. Of course, that's one tool in a toolbox. And of course, this is a journey for everyone. Anna's referring to the SME Partnership Accelerator. What measures, the question is, are also in place to help SMEs take on the scale of the challenge? And what direct investment into SMEs is there? And then how is that path actually being made easier for them to participate in international markets?
So I think, you know, what we've tried to do is create guidance, you know, kind of where do you start? I know I've done a number of webinars in the past few months with the Carbon Trust, for example, to talk to people. Well, what is this all about? What's a carbon footprint? How do you start this journey, and what can you do? So I think having the tools, and I think as companies, we've also launched last year something we call the Green Tech Innovation Platform. So basically working with Plug and Play to identify scale-up companies that we can work on technological innovation that can help, in particular, our public sector customers and create these new solutions. So I think we're trying to incentivize and we're trying to engage with SMEs as much as we can.
Great, thank you for that. Just touched on, and as has also been mentioned by some other speakers, this role of collaboration. What I'd like to do now is actually turn to Sam Lux from, if you're British, you'll know this is BEIS. Which stands for, of course, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Sam, firstly, thank you for your time today. Of course, Her Majesty's government is extremely busy getting ready for COP in a couple of weeks. What we would love to hear from you today in terms of how you think the small business community in the UK as a whole is really feeling about COP, and how and where they think they can probably engage in this process. Of course, it's often seen as a big international animal that travels around the world, but it does have really important national and local level impacts. So if you could share a few words on that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, just to say thanks so much for inviting me along today. It's such an honour to be among this inspiring array of speakers. And speaking of which, Gonzalo at the start really did hammer home the action for small businesses of going onto the SME Climate Hub and making that commitment. So just to set the scene for my answer, I'll just say a little bit about what we're doing for small businesses at the moment in the UK government. So Andrew Griffith MP was appointed as the Net Zero Business Champion back in November, and he started the Business Climate Leaders campaign. And so that's about trying to get as many small businesses in the UK to join the Race to Zero as we can. And really, I think that goes a long way to involving small businesses in COP26 as much as possible. Obviously, it's extremely oversubscribed, but the spirit of COP26 is about making that commitment and then starting to take action immediately. So yeah, Race to Zero, so all kinds of organisations, but for small businesses, the route in is via the SME Climate Commitment. And what we've done is create a UK skin for that called the UK Business Climate Hub. And so what we're doing is bringing that to as many small businesses as we can to give them the opportunity to join this global community. And kind of the way we've done that, we're just exploring every possible avenue we can. At the local level, we've created a Train the Trainer pack. So I'm not sure if probably a lot of the audience won't be familiar with growth hubs, which are sort of arm's length extensions of local councils who are solely there to support businesses. So we've partnered up with them and created lots of resources for them to be able to talk about COP26, demystify it, talk about Race to Zero, talk about just net zero, what is it, and how can they get involved. And they're a really, really important piece to the puzzle. And then secondly, we've also talked to a ton of trade associations on a regular basis to make sure that not only are we reaching that kind of geographical diversity, but also sectoral, because small businesses are so diverse in terms of what they do. They really do need that industry specific advice. So it's like bringing COP to all those sort of industries as well, and making sure that nobody feels left out. But then actually on the ground in COP as well, we've gone some way to give businesses the chance to be there. It's as much as physically possible. So we actually had a competition running until maybe a week or so ago called the Heroes of Net Zero Awards, and that invited all UK businesses with up to 50 employees to just tell us what they're doing about climate, what they're doing to reduce their emissions. And the finalists have been invited to COP itself, to an award ceremony. They're also getting an amazing prize package. BT actually contributed to that, so thanks, Gabrielle. So we are going to have some presence there, so hopefully small businesses will feel represented on the ground. And then there are lots of fringe activities as well. So we talk to so many stakeholders, and we're constantly asking what events are going on around the city, so businesses can go either kind of be there virtually or actually be in the city while COP itself is happening. So yeah, there's a kind of big splurge of answers, which hopefully address what you've asked.
Great, thank you, Sam. In terms of, if I put it this way, your kind of feedback that you're getting from the business almost on the street, you know, is there one topic that people really sort of coalesce around or allude to when they start thinking about COP? Is it sort of this link, as you're saying, to SMEs and what they can do to make a difference, or is it still seen a little bit as this big animal that we need to kind of address in terms of, you know, climate change mitigation or adaptation? Was it?
Strangely, it's mostly positive when we talk to small businesses. I mean, maybe there's that kind of issue of we preaching to the converted, because when we hold events, you get the most enthusiastic and kind of like do-gooders turning up. But when we talk to businesses, there's a lot of hope. I think that all our research, to be fair, shows that businesses on the whole do know and care about climate in the UK, but they just don't know what necessarily to do about it. So yeah, I think there's this hunger for kind of practical advice, like what does this actually mean for me? What do I do? And so that's what we're trying to address with the UK Business Climate Hub.
Fantastic. We're getting some more questions coming in. We'll work our way through those very shortly. What I also just wanted to do was touch on this point that you're raising around particularly, can I call it, the buzz and the collaboration. As you can hear, some of us on this call have known each other from quite some time, either individually or as corporate entities or through various industry organizations. And of course, one thing I think we all need to focus in on is how and where we best bring other people along with us as part of this journey. Maybe just a quick question back to Surat, and then I'll work my way around. Particularly in terms of some of the issues that you have raised. We've got a question in, particularly in terms of this digital linkage to scaling tech solutions. Surat, do you think there's anything specific that we can do to sort of strengthen transparency and collaboration around some of these issues? Particularly, for example, the question is focusing on, will establishing interoperable digital standards help to scale tech solutions? And then maybe, Gabrielle, you can come on in this one as well.
So, no, thanks for that question. So firstly, I think ICC itself established an advisory body to look at what is required in this space. And definitely one of the sort of recommendations from that committee was to establish interoperable digital standards. So yes, will it help? The short answer would be yes. But it's very easy to say that we will create this interoperable digital standards. I mean, it will not happen on its own. I mean, you almost need to, there are 2 or 3 steps before that.
Surat, I think you've knocked yourself onto mute. We've lost your sound for a moment.
Sorry. So we need to have a common standard for transition offsets and eventually sustainable businesses that could be reported under common standards. You almost need to have those standards. Now, the standards are required for 2 things. One is for measurement, for establishing digital technology, but also even for just to make financing inexpensive and make it inexpensive for SMEs to adhere to this. They need standards. I mean, today the same SME is probably supplying to multiple buyers, and all of them are providing them with different standards to adhere to, and that is impossible for them or too expensive for them. So the establishment of standards is very important. The other thing before interoperable digital standards happen is also the ability to share data cross-border, right? So I think that is still a major roadblock, and we need to find ways with the governments to see how, for this right reasons, we are able to do that more effectively.
Great. Thanks, Gabrielle. Do you have any thoughts on this? Obviously, you're working from a BT perspective. Interoperability is a key issue for you as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything that Surat said. I think another issue to look at interoperability is around electric vehicle charging. So slightly different, but it's the same kind of concept about making technology interoperable. And so we realized our biggest challenge to decarbonize and get to net zero is our fleet with open reach of 33,000 vehicles. And so we decided on the theme of collaboration to join together with the Climate Group, which is an NGO, and OpenReach and BT to set up something we call the UK Electric Fleets Coalition. And basically, we wanted to advocate to the government for the policies that we need, and for the supply of electric vehicles, and how, again, can we change the market and send these demand signals. So when we started the coalition, 3 companies, we now have over 30. And I think that has been really instrumental in trying to have those dialogues that we need to have between different actors to get to this systemic change.
Fantastic. I think this idea of systems change is, of course, another really key aspect of this conversation. Wouter, you've also just posted in the chat, because, of course, one of the other aspects, particularly from an SME perspective, as we have spoken about previously, is how we get offsetting actually moving. So we're reducing our emissions whilst we're offsetting at the same time, really to get this kind of day one impact. Could you just maybe add a few words to your thoughts on that specific aspect?
Yeah, I mean, we're only spending 0.03% of sales towards offsetting. So from my point of view, everybody could do it and making an impact right away. But of course, the focus should be on reduction. Let's be clear about that. Scope 3 emission reductions, that is the focal area. But if we could trigger people to overcompensate or compensate whatever we cannot reduce right now, we can have impact. So I think that is something that we should all take into consideration.
Excellent. Thank you, Wouter. Victor, you've mentioned that you're looking to expand, particularly across borders in your part of the world in Latin America. Particularly, you've also focused on the role of ICC in terms of helping to cooperate and collaborate and guide some of these conversations. I think the whole idea of trying to bring this community not just forward, but enlarge it so that we can find better ways of working together is something that I'm certainly taking away from this conversation. Could you maybe just add a couple of words to how your role as an SME climate activist, and I use that word in a very positive sense of the word, as a business activist for climate change, has really taken the conversation forward over the last couple of years?
Well, we have, as ICC, we have a tremendous opportunity because as we've been saying, and also Gabrielle pointed, with ICC network, we can go through the different markets, and there is an opportunity to acknowledge and to give and to guide the SMEs how to move, where to go. And I want to point out something that we understand is also important. We are considering many things related to our point of view to one part of the actors in the market. But what we are seeing these days is that through the new tendency, newcomers, new consumers, and the age of the consumers are younger, and young people request and need other type of supply, other type of companies, and they much more care about the company, the concept, and the impact of how those companies are dealing and doing business. So this is a problem, but also an advantage, and this is what we have to work on, guiding and working to understand this new demand, because otherwise will be no business for companies that even small or big do not understand how to follow. So this is the one important place where to work.
Victor, thank you for that. I think that's an extremely interesting point, because we have one, in addition to yourself on this call, we have one new brand on the market with Wouter, and we have two very established brands in very defined segments with HSB and with BT. Wouter and Surat and Gabrielle, could you maybe just add your thoughts and perspectives to what Victor's saying? How do we sort of engage into that new consumer space as businesses, and where are the linking points? Wouter, you've touched on this earlier, that you're getting a really positive response from your customer base in the way that you're approaching, you know, the specific business area that you have. But I just want to sort of expand on this point, because I think it's a really important one.
Well, I think that the younger they get, the more important it is. So what I'm saying to all my peers in the industry is you have to do it now, because once a year on your strategy agenda is no longer enough, because in 5 years you'll be out of business. You have to do it now, and otherwise you're too late, because your consumers are demanding it. Gen Z, look at the 14, 15-year-olds. They are more and more veggie, even vegan. They demand transparency from companies because they are motivated to look at what companies are doing and what they're saying, if that is honest. So we've just launched our impact report, completely fully transparent, to show what we're up against and what we're doing already, but also the troubles that we see. So I think, especially with our audience ranging from 15 to 35, 40, more and more people demand transparency and openness on what you do.
Great. Well, so thank you. Surat, do you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and Victor raises a very good point. I think there's a journey that's happened, right? I mean, even for corporates, right? I mean, corporates were driven, I mean, in the last century, were driven only by the key consideration of profit, which then moved to the key consideration of shareholder value. And I think the journey's now moved towards total societal return. I don't think companies are judged anymore on just shareholder value. And what does that mean? That means there's a bond with society, whether it is the consumers, whether it is the investors, all of whom are turning younger and younger by the day, want a very different outcome from their corporates, which is not just shareholder or share value or profits, right? So they want corporates to fulfill their bond with society, which means that corporates, whichever sector, whether it's the financial sector, whether it is any other auto sector, whatever sector, or whatever the size and scale, it's almost sort of imperative that you have to shift, you have to make that change to fulfill that demand.
Great, thanks. Gabrielle, it would be great to hear your perspectives. Obviously, BT as a company has been on a very long journey from time, going from public to private ownership and evolving also. As part of this conversation, Chris Southworth is also just asking, do we think that this shift in behavior that we're referring to is a global trend, or do you think it's more of a, dare I say, Western European sort of phenomenon at present? But Gabrielle, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I've been in this role for, I dare say, for 12 years now at BT. And, you know, the shift that I've seen in consumer engagement, employee engagement in the past two years, just completely different. You know, I could pretty much sit at BT Centre and nobody would care very much what I did and what BT did. But now we're getting, you know, we're getting investors. Yes, we're getting people who want to work for BT. We're getting our employees asking, well, what aren't we doing this and why aren't we doing this? And, you know, we have a colleague board of mostly younger colleagues within BT, and, you know, key agenda item for them is always what's BT doing on sustainability. So, I mean, I think definitely, but I also think on the global angle though, I think we're seeing it's. I don't think only people in Western Europe I know that we have a colleague association, for example, in India, because our biggest second presence outside the UK is India, and they're very active in this space. So yeah, I think it's a global issue, and obviously as people in developing countries are being more affected by climate change, they're rightly demanding things to be done.
If I may just sort of jump in on that point as well, and I completely agree with Gabriel, right? So this isn't just either a Western or a Western European phenomenon by any stretch of imagination. This is not only a global problem, there is a global sort of a movement to tackle this emergency, and everyone wants to do it. The challenges may be very different because people, countries and populations are at different stages in their sort of development, and that's why the challenges may be very different and the way it's tackled may be different, but it is definitely not just a phenomenon which is restricted to the West.
Super. Sam, you've heard from a lot of businesses, and you can hear the enthusiasm for the work that's being undertaken at COP26 itself. You mentioned the UK Climate Hub, because I think the more we talk, of course, the more that you can hear two keywords coming out: practical and action. Could you maybe just give us a little bit of a flavour of what's on those UK Climate Hub pages and how that differs from the rest of the hub? I know it's been a very good, useful vehicle on ground in the UK.
Yeah, of course. So we started out with a list of cross-cutting practical actions, really just a menu of options for businesses who maybe haven't even heard of net zero or thought about sustainability before. We've really tailored the whole page towards the micro end of the spectrum, because we don't want to make any assumptions that businesses have any resource to dedicate to this. So really just trying to break it down as much as possible. So those original pieces of advice range from switch out your lights to LEDs, things that are really low cost with a quick payback period, right through to more significant investments like installing renewables on site. But we got lots of feedback suggesting while that was useful to some extent, businesses did want that more sector specific advice. So we responded to that by working with a range of sectors. So I think, let's see if I can remember them all: agriculture, manufacturing, retail, construction, hospitality, and one more. And we worked with trade associations leading net zero work in those areas and pulled out the headline pieces of advice and then lifted them and onto the UK Business Climate Hub. So it's all like there and in a consistent way, and we really do want to add to that. This is kind of just the starting piece, getting feedback, getting lots of positive feedback actually, but then we want to add more and more sectors and more detail, and perhaps then signpost over to even more kind of granular resources as well. And then there is you probably aware there's the International Tools and Resources Library on the SME Climate Hub, and we're trying to work with the Oxford University team who's working on that to figure out how we can lift UK-specific resources for our audience as well, whether that needs to be a new library or whether we can integrate it. But yeah, that's definitely a piece that we think is really important as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. We are coming towards the end of our session. So if there's anyone out there who has not yet posted a question but is burning to do so, now is your chance. What I would like to do is also give each of our esteemed panelists, and Sam, we might have to exclude you from this question, it's okay. Of course, COP26 is looming large. It would be great to hear your perspectives as business representatives in terms of what you would like to see coming out of COP itself, either from a government or a business or a policy perspective, so that we can really help drive particularly this net zero, this SME nexus forward. And then hopefully, Sam, we could maybe ask you to take back some of these thoughts to your colleagues and co-workers, because we really want to try and make this dynamic and evolutionary as much as revolutionary. So Wouter, could we start with you?
I truly hope that there is serious commitment from all countries involved, like in Paris, and that we can move that along towards national, but also European or continental legislation, subsidies, just stimulate that to help entrepreneurs, companies, communities to make it concrete and tackle it, so we can make progress, because we need to act We need to show examples of that it is possible, like we're doing here, but most people simply don't know how. So make commitments, make it transparent, and go for it.
Excellent. Thank you. Victor, your thoughts, please.
Well, I fully agree with Wouter. I think that implementation is a very key issue. We have to not only to say, not only to think, but to work on the concrete implementation of the commitments and the understanding of the opportunity and the needs of moving quickly. And lastly, that I forgot to mention that we have to consider also the green laws that the World Bank provides to the ones that do not have the possibilities or capability. And thanks for the opportunity.
Victor, thank you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of everyone, including ICC, to help us drive this agenda forward. Surat, I'm going to turn to you. Victor's also just touched on this topic of finance, which of course is one of the big topics on the table at COP26. What are your perspectives in terms of what we should be really trying to see coming out of COP26 and some positive outcomes?
So firstly, I mean, out of COP26, where we are really looking forward to it as an organization and we are very hopeful that it will be a very successful COP. What we are looking for is definitely actionable initiatives, right? So it's not just about targets anymore. It is about actionable initiatives, which has to come out of that. And in terms of financing, I think there are 2 or 3 really clear direction that's coming out. One is a diversification of sources, diversification and collaboration across different sources, whether it's banks, NBFIs, DFIs, large corporates, etc. So that has to come together. The second is public-private partnerships. So I think public-private partnerships and risk sharing is very, very important because it is almost imperative that this is a new area for financing as well in a lot of ways. So these 2 public-private partnerships, and we did one with ATP and one with IFC around this to sort of stimulate this piece, and that is something that we need to scale up and across the industry. And the last one would be climate stimulus, right? So the policy stimulus that's required to support the climate transition is very, very important, and that has to be very clearly articulated.
Excellent. Thank you, Surat. Gabrielle, you mentioned you've been doing this for over a decade. So what's your wish list going into this COP and the so-called Glasgow package?
Yeah, so I think firstly, we need to make sure that the whole 1.5 degree science-based targets doesn't fall off the agenda with some countries not coming up with targets that are ambitious enough. Secondly, as I said, I think, the whole scaling issue, we need many more governments, organizations, businesses, small or large, to come with us on net zero. And thirdly, I think as Victor mentioned, we need these climate action plans. Do we need to have governments start legislating that big businesses need to have these very concrete climate action plans? So it's not anymore just about saying, I'm going to be net zero by X year. Actually, how are you going to get there? And what help do you need to get there so we can all collaborate?
Great. Gabrielle, with that, thank you. I'm always reminded of something that was asked of a former chief financial officer of Novozymes by a colleague. And the question was very simple. Why do you guys bother with climate change, and why do you bother with sustainability? Isn't this, old-fashioned and passé? And he simply turned around and said, you know what? My analysts might not care about this per quarter, but my investors, they do. And I think what we're hearing from everyone today is the need to invest in our future, invest in collaborating, and invest in really pushing the envelope in terms available to value and supply chains, and particularly the SME community, that they can actually be part of this journey along with all in a couple of weeks. This has been very illuminating for me. It's always inspiring to be part of these conversations. Sam, as our resident HM government representative, I'm going to leave a few seconds for you just to comment in terms of anything that you've heard from the panel today that you might want to take away with you.
I think, I that sort of put me on the spot a little bit there, but definitely the emphasis on collaboration. I don't know, we haven't potentially touched on it too much over the last hour, but a way that big businesses and small businesses can essentially talk in the same language. And hopefully that's going to be on the horizon with the new standard reporting framework that the SME Climate Hub are launching soon. And so, I think really making sure that is communicated well, along with the kind of the overall need to collaborate, so that small businesses do really feel represented at COP and they feel energized to take action going forwards.
Brilliant. Sam, thank you. And on our collective behalf, best of luck to Her Majesty's government and to a successful COP. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the questions, and especially thank you to our esteemed panel. You've been brilliant. I'm going to hand the floor back now to Chris Southworth to wrap up this session. So well, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Justin. And thank you so much to our speakers for a fantastic session. Actually, just to pick up on Sam's last point, that point around common language can't be underestimated, especially when you're working both across industry and across sector, but also across a multi-stakeholder environment. The language piece is actually sometimes the most important piece to get us all on the same page, that we're all doing the same thing. I think that's a really, really good point. Can I just end the session by saying a huge thank you to our sponsors, supporters, and our audience for all the conversations and chats and questions coming in. It's really because of you that we're able to kind of do these events and able to amplify the messages as well out around the world. That's really, really important. The content for the session will be available for another 7 days. So if you want to look at it again, or you want colleagues to look at it, that's all available to you. And then just keep an eye out for the next session. Will be on digital trade in Africa at 9 o'clock UK standard, British Standard Time. That's an all Africa lineup talking about African digital trade infrastructure. So that's a really interesting session coming from the African continent. And some media coming in the morning as well. Big digital day. That's been a common theme through the week. We've got a G7 business case for legal reform, legal harmonization, and touching on some of the points made today around interoperable standards. That's all going into the media tomorrow. So we'll be talking about that a lot throughout the day. So thank you very much, everybody. That's the end of day 2. On to the digital day, day 3, tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.